Okay, I think I might have found the new home for filming, my guest bedroom. I can shut the door, it's quiet, and it's pretty good lighting, so you might be seeing a lot more of this space. Today we're going to be talking about Manifest Destiny, and first I want to tell you what Manifest Destiny is, and then we're going to go right to talking about some of the trails west. Now, Manifest Destiny is all about us moving westward, and the question is this something that's intended? Is it inevitable? And it's as if the founding settlers had us a future-telling ball. And they said, God, do you want us to go west? And perhaps they heard a voice in their heads that said something like,
the prospects are poor.
Oh, no, they didn't want to hear that. Stupid ball. It was supposed to say, like, the prospects are excellent, because nothing ever seems to work out for me. Because the Americans felt very clearly that God wanted us to go west. And the reason is because God likes us best. God likes us best. That was the idea. Manifest destiny. Manifest meaning it's obvious, and destiny means it's inevitable in the future that we will take over the West. The reason is, why does God like us best? Why is this in the mind, the American psyche, during this time period? And it kind of goes something like this. Well, God created, think about this, everyone back then, remember, this society is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. So first of all, everybody believed in this idea of a monotheistic, single creation God, okay? And the idea is that, did he create us as like little robots, or did he give us free will? He gave us free will. So which government would he like best? The one that respected that freedom, like democracy, or one that didn't respect free will, like monarchy or dictatorship? And the idea was that God must like democracy best because it's the closest form of government to that which respects people's free will. Okay? So he must inevitably want, it must be God's purpose to spread democracy throughout the world. And therefore he wants Americans to go forth and conquer these lands that are currently overrun or inhabited by heathens who don't believe in God, or we should go settle them, and that God is behind that effort. And it's inevitable because that's part of God's plan. Okay? So, an example would be this quote here about Manifest Destiny. I know it's kind of small, you might not be able to see it, so let me tell you what it says. It says, "The right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence is another word for God, Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative development of self-government entrusted to us. It is right, such as that of the tree to the space of air and the earth, suitable for the full expansion of its principle and destiny of growth." And that was a quote by John O'Sullivan. So he's saying that just as the tree will grow into the air and take root and fully expand, so America is like a tree that now that it's been planted, it's inevitable that it will spread ever westward into that space. Okay? You can see here's some art from the time period that seems to go along with this idea. You see here this kind of beautiful woman, and she's leading people westward. She's like an angel that seems to be leading people westward, and you can see all the settlers with their horses and oxen. And here's the buffalo. And she's actually stringing telegraph wire as she goes, and she's leading the railroad and the stagecoach out west as well. Okay? So the idea is that this is part of God's plan, and that this therefore is destined to happen. Here you can see some men who seem to be looking out to the west on this like very beautiful landscape, and here you just see wagon trains just flooding over into the frontier. These are called schooners, prairie schooners, these covered wagons full of people and their stuff going to conquer the West. All right. It should be noted that these lands are not empty. They, of course, have all these Native American tribes that are inhabiting the land. And the idea is that as we go west, we'll perhaps run into them and perhaps convert them, but certainly it's right that we shall have the land as we are more in keeping with God's plan than they are. So it's not like these lands are empty, of course, and we are going to run into Native Americans and have to deal with what to do about the quote-unquote Native American problem. One thing we do is a lot of fighting. The Black Hawk War, you do not need to write this down, okay? I haven't yet told you what you're writing down on where. In fact, I probably should do that. So let me segue real fast to remind you that this video goes with this handout. We're getting ready to talk about the trails west the Sante Fe Trail, the Mormon Trail, and the Oregon Trail. And so this is the handout that's going to go with this discussion, okay? Before we get to the handout, though, I just want to make clear, and you don't need to write this down, but there was a war in western Illinois and eastern Iowa, which pressures the, it's called the Black Hawk War, which pressures the Sauk Indians, the Sauk tribe, who rebels against us to, we killed over 200 of them, and we made them go west. They were forcibly removed west of the Mississippi. So we had already moved the Cherokee in the south and the Seminole in the south. This is in the Midwest. And we also signed this treaty with the Native Americans that basically we called a conference of the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and the Crow. And we all agree that basically the Native Americans are going to be given control of the Central Plains. They'll have the Central Plains, and we're going to continually violate this treaty in the future, but it was one stopgap measure of how we were going to deal with the Native Americans after they had been removed from the East Coast, the area east of the Mississippi. Okay, so there's lots and lots of trails west, hundreds of them actually, but we're only going to focus on 3 for this discussion, and that's because they are different types of trails, and in some way they represent a whole variety of reasons why people were going west and how that functions. So we're going to be looking at the Sante Fe Trail, the Oregon Trail, and the Mormon Trail. The Sante Fe Trail goes from this area here in the Midwest and all the way down to this area in land that was controlled by the Mexican government. Okay, so that's how the Sante Fe Trail is going to work. And then the Oregon Trail goes from Independence, Missouri, all the way across the Great Plains and through Idaho to the Willamette Valley here on the northwest coast of the country. There's a famous early video game about this called the Oregon Trail. You might have played it before. And then the Mormon Trail starts here in Independence, Missouri also, and it's going to go out here to Salt Lake City in this area, also at the time owned by the Mexicans. The Mormon Trail I got to study quite a bit in my graduate course, and they had a lot more women than men going out west, and therefore they did not have enough horses and things to carry all their possessions. So I heard a lot in my course about hand carts, women pulling hand carts as they go out west, and I always thought of like kind of little luggage that you carry in the airport, but this is actually what a hand cart looks like. It's as though the women were actually the beasts of burden. They would pick up this cart and pull it behind them with whatever worldly possessions they could carry. And then, of course, if their children could fit in there to ride, that was fine, but more often the children had to walk beside. And you can see here in this picture, this graphic of Mormon women and men who are all in this massive migration pulling these hand carts together. So it was very physically rigorous and difficult crossing. All right, so we're starting now with your graphic organizer, and this goes in the middle here. What's true of all the trails? So you're going to be writing right here. What's true of all the trails? Well, all 3 trails faced dangers from attacks, Native American attacks, weather. There's very extreme weather in the central plains of the country. Terrible tornadoes, thunderstorms, lightning, drought, bitter cold. And then they also suffered from a lot of disease. It was easy to get disease. All the trails do go westward, and all of them are going to bring more Americans to that part of the continent, and therefore strengthen the claim that the United States should rule that area since Americans live there. The Oregon Trail was composed of Methodist missionaries. These are Methodists like we have, a Methodist church, Baptist church. Well, these were Methodists. And they wanted to go to Oregon and convert the Native Americans to Christianity. And that trail went all the way from Missouri to Portland, Oregon. And at the Willamette Valley was rich farmland. So not only were they going to convert the natives, but also have successful farming economy set up there. Next we have the Sante Fe Trail. The Sante Fe Trail went from Independence, Missouri to New Mexico. What was unusual about the Sante Fe Trail is that the people on there are not going to stay. It's a trade trail, so the people went there and then they traded and then they came home with Mexican goods on their wagon. So they took American goods down to Mexico, traded, then loaded back up with Mexican goods and came back to America. What was really funny about the Sante Fe Trail is that the people worked together. They worked together through the early part of the trail and through the scary part when they feared Native American attacks as they got into northern Texas, modern-day northern Texas and that area. But then as soon as they saw Santa Fe on the horizon, the actual city, they raced each other to get to Santa Fe, because whoever got there first would get to sell their goods first and would probably sell out and get a good price. So that was kind of ironic. They were looking out for each other until they saw the big city in sight. The Mormon Trail was different from the Oregon Trail in that they weren't necessarily trying to convert the natives. They were trying to escape religious persecution. If you remember, Joseph Smith had already led the Mormons from New York to Illinois, Nauvoo, Illinois, where they had built a temple. But it's there that Joseph Smith is arrested by local authorities. The practice of polygamy is still very controversial. And he's actually shot by an anti-Mormon mob. And then a younger man named Brigham Young was thought to be the next prophet by most. And so he is going to lead them on this march from Illinois to Salt Lake City, trying to hope that if they set themselves up in the desert, that people will leave them alone and they won't have to worry about persecution. Some people back then did not think that Brigham Young should be the next prophet. They thought one of Joseph Smith's sons should be, and so the Mormon faith is going to kind of split into a larger portion, all of which recognized Brigham Young, and then a splinter group that recognized the son of Joseph Smith. The Oregon and Mormon trails, so now we're moving to this part of your handout. What do they have in common, the Oregon and Mormon trails? Okay. They have in common that they were founded by religious people and by people who were planning on staying there and living permanently. Now the Santa Fe and Oregon Trail, this would mean this goes in this area, they both began in Missouri. So Missouri was a big launching point for people who were going on these trails. And then the Mormon and Santa Fe trails, so that goes in the bottom square underneath the oval in the middle, they had in common that they both led to territory that was actually in Mexico at the time and ruled by the Mexican government, not U.S. authorities. Not on your graph, but something that you need to be aware of is what happens with Oregon during this time period. If you remember, in the Convention of 1818, we had agreed to share Oregon with the British. And so that land went all the way up here to the 5440 line, and then came all the way down here into what we consider today modern Washington State and Oregon. Well, we started to not be really clear about who controlled this territory. This was in dispute, where the line should actually be drawn between Canada and the United States. So you just need to know, you don't need to write this down, but you could write it down if you wanted to, that the United States and Britain start to dispute where the border should be drawn. And so some expansionists in America who are very nationalistic, they start saying that we should take it all the way to the 5440 parallel. So 5440 is up here. So they said, we want the United States to end up here, 5440 or fight. And they wanted us to fight Britain to get the entire Oregon territory if necessary. Fur trading had declined in the area though, so the British are less interested in the whole territory themselves. And a president who's about to be elected, President Polk, he considers the land north of the 49th parallel to not actually be good for farming. So we're going to agree in 1846 to just extend the 49th parallel boundary through that territory. And so that's how we get the smooth, like, northern border up there that we have today. So let me back you out here and let you see. So originally, some expansionists wanted to control all this up to here, but Polk signs a compromise which just extends this boundary to basically half Oregon with the British. Unfortunately, they got this really cool island here called Vancouver, which is quite a vacation hotspot today, but they get all of Vancouver, even though the tip of it is under the 49th parallel. Okay? So, that is what you need to know about early expansion, what Manifest Destiny is, what trails going west look like typically, what some of their motivations were, and the dangers that they faced, and then also how we solved the Oregon dispute. So, next we're going to be talking about how we came to inhabit and control Texas, parts of Texas. Okay? So, adios, partner.